Hi, in this video we'll show you an introduction into the Blox service of the Nabu development platform. It is the main way to do service orchestration in the platform. So let's create a service, and we are greeted by a few panes here. So at the top we have the logic pane where we have the steps that are sequentially executed. And at the bottom we have the interface, which is basically the contract that the service has to other services. So it allows you to define the input and the output. If we look at the sequence here, we have at the very root, we have a sequence, which is merely a grouping of steps. So we could add new sequences by clicking this button. We should really add comments to what we're doing. The idea is to create a business narrative here. So let's say do something here, do something else. And this allows you to really construct a story for everyone to read and understand. Then we have the next one, which is a map step, which we'll come back to in a second. We have the for loop, which allows you to loop over data sets, for example. We have a switch, which allows for conditional execution. We have a throw, which allows you to throw exceptions in case something's wrong. And then we have the much lesser used last three. We have a catch, which allows you to catch exceptions that are thrown by someone else. We have a finally, which allows you to execute a particular piece of the Blox service, no matter whether there's an exception or not, will always be executed. And we have a break, which allows you to do an early exit from a for loop. So, but again, these last three are very rarely used. So let's add a map step. In the map step, you can see that there is a deactivate map tab here. If we click on it, it becomes activated and it's by default selected. We can see the pipeline of the service. So in Blox, all the variables that exist on the pipeline, and we obviously have the input and the output, which are currently still empty. And we have local variables that we could add here. So this is again a structure with the structure editor, and you can check out the other video to see more details on the structure editing. If we go to the interface, we could add a few inputs. So for example, my text, and we could add a list, my list, and let's make it a list by setting the max occurs to unbounded, and a min occurs of 0 to make it optional. And let's add a Boolean as well, my Boolean. In the output, we have multiple returns, so we can return as many objects as we want. We could, for example, return 3 fields. Let's just call them field 1, field 2, and field 3. And then if we go to the map step, we can perform some logic. We could, for example, say, let's take whatever is in my text and map it to field 1. And we could do the same for the list. And in this particular case, because we were mapping a list to a non-list, if you click on the line, you will see that an index is automatically inserted. And 0 means, because it's 0 base, that you take the first element of the list. So let's take the second line and set it to 1, which means we'll take the second element from the list. Let's also add a comment to state what we're doing, do something here. Now we're ready to do a first run of the service. So let's add a value here, and let's add some values to the list, and a Boolean value as well. When I click run here, the developer will actually send this input to the server it's connected to. The server will run the actual service with the given input, and it will return the output to the developer for display purposes. So when we run it, we see the output appear here. And if you check out this mapping, this makes sense. We have the my text here, and we have the list, the first and the second value. So it works as we would expect. Let's try some conditional execution. So to have a very simple conditional, you can just use the label. And we could say, let's take the Boolean here to decide whether or not to do something. So let's put it on the label, which means if the Boolean is set to true, we'll execute this particular map step. And we could, for example, put a fixed value. You can do that by double clicking. You can configure simple fixed strings or do entire calculations within a fixed value. And you'll see the blue arrow here. And now we should be setting the output value if the Boolean is set to true. and we indeed see this appear. If we run it again with the Boolean set to false, it does not appear, and we just get the value here. Suppose we want to do a second mutually exclusive condition. This will obviously work, and this here we could put something like my other fixed value. But when you're doing mutually exclusive conditions, it's usually easier to just use a switch statement, which is specifically meant for that. We still use the labels, but if we have no label and we assign a switch, we get the default, which means if no step up until this step evaluates true, we'll take this particular step. So in this case, if we say false, we get my other fixed value. We have a list here, so let's add a for loop, and you see that we get the validation error in this particular case that we don't have a query yet, so the for loop is not yet valid. So we can add a query. We want to loop over this list. So it will loop over that list, and it will take the current value of that list and put it inside a variable that we define here. If you define it, you don't have to. And you can also add an index, again, optional. And if we then add a map step to the for loop, you will see these two variables appear that only exist within the for loop, so they don't exist outside of it. In this particular case, we could just add this mapping. So we just map the value from the list to the field one here. And because we're iterating, that means the last value will win. So we have this tree. If we do a conditional break, so we have the index here, we could say, let's break if my index is 1. That means because it's 0 based, it will actually take the second element. So we should end up with this 2, which we see appear here. So we can do a lot of stuff within the for loop. Now the Blox service itself, its primary purpose is to do orchestration. And you can do that in Matstep. So I could go full screen, which sometimes makes it easy to do complex mappings. Let's do a join first, so I can search for services, just drag drop them. We have the list, we just map the input list to the join service, and we use a fixed value, comma, as a separator, and let's just map it to field 1. Okay, if we run this, so let's add a few values again, you will see that we get the comma separated list in this particular case. We could chain more services to it, so let's do a split, which kind of undoes what we just did. Let's split on comma. We can remove this line because we're no longer interested in it. We're interested in this particular list, but let's also reverse it. So we want to have the reverse list. And then we can add that to the output. Okay, so now we have a very simple orchestration of services. And if we run this, let's add a few values, we'll actually see the reverse list of what we entered. This has been a basic introduction into the Blox service. There's a lot more to be told, obviously, but this should get you started. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.